Hi, everybody. Karen Roby here with Larry Dignan for ZDNet, talking today about a little history lesson here, looking back to Adobe's Omniture purchase. This was about a decade ago, Larry, and you put a piece together here for us at ZDNet talking about what we've kind of learned since then and how this strategy now makes perfect sense. Talk about that for us.
Yeah, I mean, when Adobe first bought Omniture for 1.8 billion, there was a lot of head scratching, especially on Wall Street. Frankly, I didn't quite get the deal either in a lot of ways. But at the time, Adobe was just doing Photoshop, Acrobat, Flash, the software it's kind of been known for. And it wasn't even a cloud company at that point. So when they bought Omniture, which was basically tracking websites and analytics and things like that, it was kind of a head scratcher. And so we went back, we talked to some of the folks, who are at Adobe now, who used to be, came to the company through Omniture, and just kind of looked back at the deal where, the CEO, who was still the current CEO, he basically, he went out there and he did an all hands meeting, and his thing was that creativity, content, and data are all going to create this flywheel. And today it sounds, well, duh, it makes a ton of sense, right? But when you look back at the time, Adobe looked a little crazy doing it. And this was also the time where eBay bought Skype. We had the AOL Time Warner deal kind of come and go. So there were a lot of big deals that were happening that just didn't work out. And this wasn't a huge deal, but it was a deal where it kind of transformed the company. Because just a couple years later, Adobe basically did this huge cloud push. So today, Adobe has the Creative Cloud, which is Photoshop and Illustrator and all those things. It's got a Document Cloud, which is PDF. And then it's got this thing called the Experience Cloud, which is all about marketing, analytics, advertising, a whole bunch of stuff. And when you look at the stack of stuff that Adobe has, it's pretty sprawling now. And they've done that through acquisition. They've done that through a bunch of different ways with new products and things like that. But what happened was after they bought Omniture, they got a foothold in software as a service. And that really reinvented the whole company to become more of a cloud company. So today, most of its revenue is subscription-based. Back in 2012, Adobe was mostly based on software licensing. So the revenue model looked totally different. And Adobe went out there and Wall Street crushed them because they had to lay off people. They had to revamp their revenue recognition practices. There were some challenges there, right? Because instead of, you make more money up front if you have a licensing sort of business model. So they took their lumps, stuck to their guns, and before you know it, Adobe was seen as a cloud company after probably 3 or 4 years. So they took their lumps, they had a strategy, they stuck with it, and they just kept going. So the real importance of the Omniture part was Omniture is kind of what started that whole path. We didn't know it at the time, but once you got a couple years out from buying Omniture, Adobe was able to become a cloud company. And now they're, competing with Salesforce. They've got more than 11 billion in revenue expected this year, their fiscal year. And that's up from like 3 billion back in 2012. So it's grown a lot. And the other interesting part from an industry perspective is that when Adobe took all of its lumps transferring to the cloud and doing that big digital transformation, it cleared the way for other software companies to make the same sort of move and find a more receptive analyst community, and Wall Street was more understanding of the whole thing. So Adobe really paved the path for Microsoft to become more of a cloud company. It paved the path for Oracle, SAP, go down the list, right? And all these software companies wound up following that Adobe blueprint. So, as a history lesson, it's just pretty interesting. If you have a strategy that you could actually carry out over a decade, it's, that long-term thinking can really pay off.
Yeah, and of course, Larry, so many people now learning so much from those decisions. I thought it was interesting in your article talking about though the skepticism, even from the Omniture employees, of course. Who one of them said that he was so perplexed trying to understand the move to acquire a web analytics company, but was just hoping that he'd get Photoshop as part of it. So interesting to see, even from the employee standpoint, so much of what was probably going through their minds at this time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that whole vision of content and data coming together was, pretty revolutionary at the time. And it also sounded like a bit of a leap. And, the other thing about the Adobe Omniture acquisition was that it really, for enterprise software, sort of set a blueprint for companies to transform into cloud companies. So since Adobe went through the pain, they basically, as other companies did it, like Microsoft, Oracle, SAP, they found a more receptive audience on Wall Street, right? They understood, okay, this is a 2-year process or whatever. And they could kind of thank Adobe for that, right? Because they had an executive team that had a vision, stuck with it. They filled in a lot of blanks with acquisitions, but that's kind of the blueprint as it is today, right? Whether it's SAP, Oracle, or whoever, they buy a lot of companies. So really just kind of set that model up for the whole sector.
All right, so much to learn from this, Larry. And the full article, of course, can be found on ZDNet. Thanks for watching.